Hello, East Texas. This is Adam Morrow with Express Employment Professionals, and I am here at the law offices of Ramey Flock in beautiful downtown Tyler. And I have the privilege today to talk with Eric Kolder. Hey, Eric.
How are you?
Doing great, man. Have you read all of these books here behind us?
Just today, yes.
Awesome.
Yeah, many times.
Eric honored us by serving as a panelist in the recent event we held, unveiling the East Texas Employment Survey. And he handled some questions specifically about kind of the legal landscape around drug screens. And a lot of the participants there had some questions about that. So we're going to follow up with him for a few minutes and bring in those questions to him. So thank you so much for letting us come by.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
You bet. So just to recap, we conducted a survey of area businesses just to kind of get the temperature of the employment scene in East Texas. One of the questions we asked was, what percentage of your job applicants do not pass a drug test? And we were looking for just, did they pass or did they not? But what we found out was 46% of the companies, almost half, don't even screen their applicants. And then a little over 40% have 1 out of 10 that fail. And lots of questions in this area. There's kind of a changing cultural landscape here around drug use and that topic, and so a lot of questions here. So Eric, I just want to throw some of them at you. Is that okay?
Yeah, shoot.
So at the luncheon that we had, one of the things you mentioned is, in your business, in employment law, you talk with a lot of business owners, and you've heard somebody say, if we drug screened all of our applicants, we wouldn't have a workforce. So how do you, from your perspective, balance that need for people with the need for safety?
Right, that's a good question. So the key issue there is, what type of work is this employee going to be doing? Mm-hmm. So obviously things like operating heavy machinery, driving trucks for your company, driving vehicles, things where impairment could not only harm them or just decrease their own productivity, but actually seriously harm them or someone else or the general public, which would be the worst case scenario. So if you have a situation where you know for a fact that this employee will definitely be working on heavy machinery, driving trucks, driving vehicles, operating cranes, anything like that, where they can seriously harm themselves, others, or the public. In that situation, obviously recommend having a drug screening program. Obviously, that's easy. The issue came up in the conference because what about these other job positions where maybe we're cutting out applicants who would be good fit for the job, but they have a recreational drug problem that's not really relevant to what they're doing. And again, there's no risk of them operating heavy machinery, hurting themselves or others. It'd be more of a productivity problem. So in those situations, you may not want to do the drug testing because you can just monitor the productivity on your own. You don't know why they're maybe not producing well, but they're not producing well, and you can deal with it then. So if it's less of a safety issue, the drug screening is less important. But if it is, there's no way around it. You need to do it.
That makes sense. So in some cases, no wiggle room. In other cases, you can make it more about the productivity and leave the other questions unasked. Is that what you're saying?
Precisely.
Is it possible to have a policy where it's just can't use drugs at work?
Everyone should have that policy.
Right.
That's
obviously.
That's a fine policy. And a follow-up most of the time is, well, how do I know?
Right. How do you enforce that?
Right. And so when it comes to under the influence type testing, are you under the influence right now? Not have you used this drug in the past week or 10 days or month. There's not great tools for that. So there's great tools for alcohol. You may not have one in your facility, right? Everybody knows breathalyzers, those sorts of things. But my understanding is even for like marijuana, there's not a good test out there for detecting whether someone's under the influence at that moment. So that leaves you with sort of circumstantial evidence, just observing their behavior and trying to decide whether you believe they're under the influence or not. So the policy's good. Enforcement and proof are a little bit difficult. Alcohol is the easiest one probably of the bunch. The opioid epidemic has led to this becoming a very big gray area where there's maybe suspicion but no proof and everything else. So in those situations, it's better to focus on productivity. You should have the policy of no drug use while at work, certainly. Detection and enforcement are naturally going to be more difficult.
That makes sense. Well, what would you recommend for an employer that has been drug testing in a high hazard industry, but they're finding it really difficult to fill open positions? Should they change their policy? What should they do?
In a high hazard situation, I would recommend keeping the policy the same. I mean, the search is difficult, but and maybe this is a paranoid lawyer talking, but the possibility of a catastrophic accident in that situation, you have someone under the influence in your employ, it's just not worth it. Not from a dollars and cents standpoint, but also obviously from the human standpoint. You can't have a fatality on your watch or serious injury. Anything you can do to avoid it needs to be done within reason. And if you know it's a high hazard position, you have to just, keep searching. That's all I can tell you. There's no magic bullet for that one. If it's high hazard, you need to drug screen.
Yep, that makes sense. Well, a lot of people are watching the landscape nationally on the topic of marijuana. It's legalized to various extents in some states. What do you anticipate at the federal level and then maybe at Texas with respect to the legalization of marijuana?
I actually expect it to eventually be marijuana eventually be legalized at the federal level sometime in my lifetime. That doesn't give employers much predictive value. I don't see it happening anytime in the next 5-10 years. Maybe the election in 2020 would have something to do with that, but it doesn't seem to be a forefront issue nationwide, so I don't expect a federal change necessarily soon, and I don't expect a Texas change before there's a federal change, to be honest. Could be wrong about that, but I would foresee a federal change before a Texas change, and I don't see either one happening within the next election cycle. Okay,
so it's coming, something's going to change, but it's down the road.
Right, and that's just a personal opinion. There's no pending litigation that I see. Pending legislation that I would say, oh, this is likely to be passed. Anything like that, I don't see anything like that on the horizon. But I do, just from a personal standpoint, imagine public opinion seems to be shifting in that direction nationwide, and probably eventually marijuana. And that's not to say anything else.
Of course, that's what we're talking about. Well, in terms on that subject, on marijuana, in your experience, professionally, as you see this dealt with in court, do you have any understanding about comparing marijuana intoxication to alcohol intoxication? Are they comparable? Are they different? What do you know about that?
Well, I think, as far as the way a jury is going to look at it, intoxication is intoxication, whether it be, opioids or marijuana or alcohol. But from the standpoint of what is the real implications of the inhibitions, it seems to me like, and full disclosure, I don't do either one, but it does seem to be like you can become much more impaired much more quickly using alcohol than marijuana. I don't know if that's a commonly held belief among the average population, though, to where a jury would cut someone some slack, so to speak, for being under the influence possibly of marijuana versus alcohol. I think if you're in a situation where you have someone that's on your side of the case, a witness or a key person that's under the influence of drugs or alcohol, I think you're in a very bad position.
Okay. So the moral of the story is, don't be intoxicated. All right. Well, another topic that was broached by our listeners had to do with annual employee reviews. And I know that in employment law, you probably touch a lot of different areas of the workplace. How effective do you find annual employee reviews? Are they beneficial?
It depends on how honest they are.
Okay.
This happens, in my experience, frequently. People are too nice in their evaluations, and then they try to say later, which is probably the truth, that we had more issues than we put down on paper. We were trying to be nice. Well, now you have a document that says otherwise. And so if you're going to do them, be honest. And you don't have to be mean, but you need to be honest. Also, it's typically done annually. I recommend doing it more than annually. A lot changes over a year. If you're going to, and even from the employee standpoint, they need feedback to be able to change their behavior, right? Because if you're doing something wrong for 6 months, then maybe you could have changed it had you known halfway through that period, but you didn't know until the end of the year. So those are two things I would recommend, is to do them at least annually, if not more than annually. But if you do them, make sure you're not mean, but be honest, because it won't help you if you're not.
That makes a lot of sense. And I'm a person that I don't want to ever hurt anybody's feelings, and so in that moment, I may want to take it easy on the person, but what I hear you saying is that it doesn't help them in the short term or in the long term if we need to go back and address an issue. It's not on paper, and what's on paper is more likely to be seen as what is.
Absolutely, that's exactly right. It's no fun, but that's kind of the cost of being the boss. So it won't make you the most popular person necessarily, but it's better for your business.
Interesting. All right, inquiring minds want to know a little bit more about you personally, Eric. So any podcasts that are at the top of your list?
Yeah, I listen to Dan Carlin's Hardcore History. He comes out like once a year almost, but it's very good if you like history. He's very good at telling stories. It's almost like mini audiobooks. And Mike Heiser's Bible podcast. You ever heard of Mike Heiser?
No.
Anyway, those are both interesting.
I'll have to get that from you later. I'll be interested in that. Any books that you're into right now?
Yeah, I'm reading a book right now called A History of Conversation by a guy named Stephen Miller. And so he goes through the history of conversation and how important or unimportant it was in different societies and cultures, and how people evaluate the importance of it, or what's good conversation versus not. So it's sounds kind of boring at first, but it's actually pretty interesting.
I'll have to get the cliff notes on that one from you. So, a hot topic among businesses that we deal with at Express, there's a new generation that's entered the workforce, the millennials, and then right behind them now entering the workforce, Gen Z. And so many of the managers and decision makers and bosses out there are in older generations. And so any advice from your perspective on how to manage that mixing of generations in the workplace?
One difference that continually seems to come up is the younger generation's desire for greater flexibility at work versus pay. Everybody wants pay, but I think the younger generations want more flexibility, and you can make some more concessions on flexibility in the expense of pay almost. And I think even attract better workers. And the younger generation seems to be more desirous of their time than their money, and so by the same token, if you're gonna infringe on one or the other, you may want to be more careful infringing on the time restraints versus the lack of bonus, let's say, that you think they may have been expecting. So that's one thing that I perceived at least.
Yeah. So if an employer is willing to be a little flexible on the way that they structure work where possible, they might be able to attract some folks that would really make a difference for their business.
I think so.
I've seen that in my own workplace. A gentleman on my team, I know he would probably take an extra day of PTO over $1,000 on some days. So
yeah, I know a guy like that too.
Yeah. Awesome. All right. Well, in terms of the industry that you're involved in with employment law, and what is your forecast for your industry? How's it looking in the near future?
I'm actually optimistic about the prospects of employment here in East Texas, because again, a small sample, right? I'm just one person, so it's mainly anecdotal, but people seem to be forming businesses and hiring more people. Most clients I talk to, their employee numbers seem to be increasing, and so they're going more into these areas of compliance with ADA and FMLA, so getting past 15 employees, getting past 50 employees. I haven't seen so many where people are dropping out of those ranges. It seems to be more increasing into those ranges. So that seems to be a very good sign from my perspective of, okay, people are hiring and expanding their businesses, so that's good for everybody.
Awesome. That's good. That's good news to hear. Well, you heard it here from Eric Kolder at Ramey Flock. Thanks for joining us, guys.